Hello, my name is Tim Smith, and I'm one of the members here at Desert Grace Church. We have a great message for you today. If you enjoy this video, be sure to give us a thumbs up and leave a comment so we know that you've been blessed. God bless.
Justice is a concept that we hear a lot about it. It's kind of a loaded word in a lot of ways, but it's a concept that basically tries to be fair, impartial, and really to be morally correct, to make good moral decisions, to treat others with ways that really kind of show that we are who we say that we are, whether it's to be good Christians or whether it's to be just a good person. That's just kind of the idea of what justice is all about. And to be honest with you, we could really talk about this in simple terms when it comes to the times when something is done and somebody has done something against you, that in the most simplest of terms, we want the punishment to fit the crime. And that would be an easy way to say it, that if somebody harms you unjustly, they've done something to you, that the punishment should be kind of equivalent to the crime. And that's something that if you were to go into the court today, that they are trying to do. It's about making somebody right or somebody whole when something has gone wrong. But this has frequently not been the case, right? Perhaps you're familiar with the most famous family feud, the Hatfields of West Virginia and the McCoys of Kentucky. Now, if you know your history, you've studied this, right? And you've got wonderful, and I don't even need to go into it. The conflict between the Hatfields and the McCoys has gone on for a very long time. In fact, it began during the Civil War. There was most of both families that were fighting for the Confederates. And so there was a little bit that was fighting for the Union, and so mostly it was the Confederates, and that might have been where this whole thing started. That's kind of what they think. But then they know for sure that at some point there was a conflict over who owned what land. So that was really a big deal, and I do have to tell you that this could be a conflict that we would face if somebody takes your land and you don't think they should. If a neighbor came and built their wall a little closer to your house, right, that you'd begin to start to wonder, are you taking some of the property that belongs to us? And in fact, they know that there was definitely conflict over a pig. And as part of this, there was a point in time that some people will tell you that the TV show Family Feud was actually based off the Hatfields and McCoys. And they actually brought, in 1979 or so, actual Hatfields and McCoys onto the show. And they had a pig on there for the whole week so that this could be finally resolved. Whoever won got the pig, all right? There's even been modern-day lawsuits over access to a cemetery because one of the parties owns the land and the other one was being blocked from being able to visit their dead relatives. And in fact, if you really want to talk about lawsuits, there are actually circumstances under which the whole feud between the Hatfields and the McCoys made it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. They're known by one of the most famous feuds among families, which, by the way, in their part of the world is very rural, and there's a lot of intermarrying. And scientists will say that part of the reason they might be having an issue is because of that they get angry quicker. At any rate, their understanding of justice led the Hatfields and the McCoys to continuously enact revenge. It was something that was going on and on and on and on. That once you do something to somebody else, they feel it's unjust. They do it to you. You feel it's unjust. So you go back and enact your revenge, and it goes back and forth. And pretty soon, most people are not really sure what we started fighting about. Sounds like a good church split right there. See, the issue is this. If you take some of our land, then we're going to take some of yours. If you are going to mess with our pig, we're going to mess with your pig. I only want the bacon. That's all that matters. Kill one of our family, and we're going to hunt you down. This is what revenge is all about. This is what it becomes. And pretty soon, it doesn't even matter if the offense against you is real. It's just something that must be repaid. My question for us this morning is, what is Jesus' call to his disciples as it relates to lex talionis and justice? Now, you may not be familiar with lex talionis. Don't worry, I'm going to teach you that one too. All right? But that's the question. Because this is a common belief back in Bible times. Jesus wants to discuss it in his sermon. And we've been talking about what he's been saying in Matthew chapter 5, where he's basically kind of challenging the religious status quo. Where he says, listen, you have heard it said this, but I tell you, you need to act in a way that goes way beyond that. Look at what's behind this rule and live into that. Rather than simply saying, if the trick is that I just don't have to do this, then I'm going to stop right there. His examples so far have been it's not enough to just simply not kill your neighbor. Murder is not really just a matter of physically snuffing someone out. You have to be sure that you aren't killing somebody in your heart. That it's just as easy. He's also told us that it's just not okay to be lusting after others. If you do so, you have already committed adultery. It doesn't matter if you actually go to the act. And then he tells us that it's more than empty words. Your yes or your no is a promise to uphold because it represents what is in your hearts. Is your heart filled with deception and lies, or is your heart filled with true promises? Jesus' point is simple. It is not enough to simply follow rules. There's a big misunderstanding among people who are on the outside of Christianity who think that when you come into the church, the biggest thing that's going to change in your life is that you now have a rule book by which to follow. And I wish that we could get a hold of some of those people and say, look, it's not about the rules. It's about a new way of life where God transforms you. And by the way, it's a better life because it is one lived step in step with God. So Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 is where we find ourselves. And it begins like this. You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek as well. And if someone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Oh, this is a scripture that when we get to, we go, Jesus isn't serious. Certainly what he's doing here is just kind of being an exaggerator, right? He doesn't really mean that. He does, right? The Old Testament demands justice. And in fact, it expects that the law of talion, which by the way is the same as the lex talionis, will be our guide. That we are going to be kind, wonderful people. And if somebody takes something from you, all they have to do is make it whole. Sometimes we get into this whole thing where it needs to be, they make you whole, plus they're punished to a certain amount. What the law of just kind of the eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth really demands is that you are able to get back exactly what was taken. But it also expects and demands that we will uphold the law. Lex talionis is an eye for an eye. It's the basis for all such systems. Basically, it would be what is the value of what has happened to you and how do we make you whole. That's the whole thing. And the Romans practiced this, and they were practicing it in the Bible times and throughout Jesus' time. And if you really want to get down to it, it is the same thing that we are talking about today. It's ultimately the same sort of idea of the punishment should fit the crime. But God has told us that there should be no pity and enforcement of justice. You go back to Deuteronomy. I know a lot of you just love to sit around the house and read through Deuteronomy and Leviticus and read about all the laws. And what you'll find is basically this concept of we must be sure that we are being just in what we do and that we are just in how we return. And you'll find this exact same phrase in there, an eye for an eye. And in fact, in other places in the Bible, you'll find eye for eye, tooth for tooth, keeps going on and on and on. And one of the things that God tells us is that if we fail to enforce justice within the community, we will contaminate the community. That we will actually destroy the ability to be within one another, to be able to react and relate to one another, because we have stopped worrying about making sure that justice has been done. So lex talionis is introduced, sort of intended to make sure that not too much revenge is enacted. And now I want to make sure we get that this is injustice of any sort. Now, it is totally possible that you could commit an unjust act against somebody else completely accidentally. You don't have to be sitting around thinking, I am going to go hurt somebody, and then, this is going to be the result. Think about a car accident. No, very few people anyway. There's probably some people who are crazy enough, but very few people wake up in the morning and go, today's the day I'm going to go ram somebody else's car with mine, and let's see how that turns out. Normally, what happens is you're driving along and one of the two drivers makes an error. And in the midst of that error, sometimes absolutely horrendous things happen. And so the idea of this eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth is that if I have accidentally destroyed your car, then I owe you another car, just like the one that I took. If I have caused you bodily damage, then most likely I need to pay your medical bills and make sure that you have been taken care of. If I've caused you to miss work, I had better have some money to be able to pay for you to have that income that you've lost. As a guide, the law is very limiting as a factor rather than being a positive factor. The idea isn't that, hey, look what you can do. You can go all this way. It's not saying this is wonderful. It's saying, no, you are capped at a certain amount. So if somebody takes your eye, you can't go and rip out their heart. Well, hey, it's a body part for a body part, right? Which is worth more to you? Is it your eye or your heart? If you had to pick one to lose, which one is it? You see, this is the idea behind the law. It limits how much you can seek. It limits how much something else can take. It is a law that states what is permitted, what is prohibited, where the boundaries lie. It is not one that says, here's how we get ourselves to a better place in society. Now, I want to be really clear here. It would be really weird if even today, something happened and you lost a hand, and the first thing was, all right, that's fine. I got to go get somebody's hand. You did this to me. I want your hand. What would we do? Would we frame it and put it on the wall? What would we rather have? Money, right? Give me some cold hard cash. And guess what? By the time of Jesus, monetary compensation was already preferred to body parts. The question is, how much is an eye worth? How much is a hand worth? Which hand was it? Is one more valuable than the other? Is a leg more valuable than an arm? This is a bit of a challenge, isn't it? It's a bit of a struggle. This is the whole issue. How do you find the just value of whatever it is you've lost? If somebody steals $100 of yours, it's easy. What is the just value? For them to give you the $100. But if somebody accidentally does something and now all of a sudden you have no arm, that's a whole other story. Jesus basically wants to turn this on its head. What he says is that he wants you to worry more about your heart when it comes to somebody giving you or doing something against you that is unjust. Now, I don't know of too many people that have gone through their lives without some sort of unjust thing happening to them. Being blamed for something you didn't do, somebody, getting you like the accident, somebody making an error or whatever else. Jesus says, look, you've heard it say an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I tell you, he says, do not resist an evil person. Now, I want you to remember that means that there has been an injustice. When there is an injustice, it is an evil thing. The idea of justice is to bring things back in order. If you deserved what you got, then there is no injustice. Jesus might have had Deuteronomy 32:35, and I told you, you're probably sitting around reading, and you probably already knew this. But Jesus, or God here, says that it is his right to avenge. It's not your job to go out and do anything on God's behalf. It's God's job to do it. So Jesus gets specific here. And the first thing he says is that if we will continue to be vulnerable when somebody does an injustice against us, especially something physical, it will avoid a spiral into violence. Now, what he says is when somebody slaps you on the left cheek, turn the right. Or the other way around, I don't know. That's what he's saying. But what he's really saying is that if you will continue to allow yourself to be vulnerable, to realize that this could be an accident or even it is an injustice, but rather than immediately deciding that you are going to enact revenge, that you will avoid a slapping fight right there in front of everybody. I don't know if you've ever seen a video of people fighting and it just starts off and then it gets silly. And nobody knows what the fight is about. And they're all standing around and they're just kind of watching and cheering or whatever. Turning the other cheek is nothing more than sacrificing the right to take action against the person who slapped you. It's saying it's not important that I immediately get justice for this. Maybe I need to check my heart. You see, back then, a slap in the face, most likely what Jesus is talking about, by the way, is a backhanded slap. But a slap in the face probably, was and probably still is really an appropriate use for the court. If some stranger were to walk up and start slapping you, could you not call the police? Could you not have the police come? Would they not begin to write a report and ultimately you could be in court and they would be punished for their actions? That was sort of the whole idea. And Jesus is saying, rather than worry about getting your justice right away, continue to let yourself be in a position where that's a possibility. Where continued injury not necessarily is invited. Jesus here isn't saying, like, look, if somebody slaps you on one cheek, say, you know what, why don't you close your fist and try a little harder? Hit me again. That kind of offended me, but it didn't really hurt. Come on, do some real damage. That's not what he's saying. He's not saying that if somebody starts beating on you, you shouldn't duck out. What he's saying is that don't worry about your revenge. Look beyond the injustice that is happening to you for a moment and look at the other person differently. Because if you were to walk up to me and slap me, whether it was with the full hand or in the back of the hand, I'm going to be offended immediately. No matter how good of friends we are. And Jesus says, before you take any action against this person, stop, give up your right, and then go from there. Your heart needs to see people in a certain way. The second thing he tells us is that sacrificial giving has greater value than material possessions. Oh, wait a minute. Did he just really say that? Did Jesus really just say, look, here's the deal, right? If somebody is suing you to take your shirt, Don't stop there. Give them your tunic as well. Jesus is essentially saying that whether it's right or whether it's wrong, remember, we're talking about injustices against you. So assuming that we are going to court unnecessarily, something you didn't do, somebody says, hey, I'm going to sue the shirt off of you. You go, all right, here's the shirts. And by the way, take the jacket too. Because I would rather, it's more important to me, rather than holding on to all of this, that we can just be in harmony together. It is an important issue here. The tunic was also somebody's blanket. If you are willingly handing it over to somebody else, you are actually showing that person love. So Jesus is saying, even the person who is being unjust or unjust towards you, you need to show them love. Wait, God, have you ever tried? Oh, yeah, Jesus, okay. Right? The material possession of a tunic was actually so valued that it was protected. Exodus 22 goes into this. If you borrow your neighbor's tunic, you better return it before nightfall, lest they get cold. You don't want them to be cold. And you know what else is really important about this particular thing? People didn't have closets full of tunics and shirts. So basically, without a shirt and a tunic, you're pretty much standing there naked. You'd be vulnerable to whatever is around. So somebody has been unjust against you, and now you are just absolutely vulnerable to them. And Jesus says this is how it ought to be. Oh, Jesus, you're asking an awful lot here. Why? The next thing he says is that we need to avoid futile resistance, because all that happens when we are resisting and we're going to lose anyway is a self-destructive bitterness. And you have met somebody who is so bitter that you don't want to be around them. You have met somebody who is so upset that they just, you want to say, hey, how's your day? And when we ask that question, we sometimes do really want to have the honest answer, but we really don't want people to sort of verbally vomit all over us. Right? So how's your day? Well, it's been a bit of a struggle. Now, that's where you ought to leave it. If I want to know more, I'll ask. More than once, I've said, how's your day? And got information I did not need to know. I don't need to know how many times you've been in the bathroom today. That wasn't what I asked. Or what the color of your vomit was. Both of those are true stories, by the way. How you doing? Well, I've been throwing up. Oh, ooh, yeah, no. Well, sorry, I'll pray for you and goodbye. Click. Because otherwise I might hear more that I don't want to hear. We have been around people who are so angry at the world that they are like the Hatfields and McCoys. They don't even know who they're angry with any longer. I used to laugh because I worked in a parking garage, right? And people would come through. You pull in, you get a ticket. You're in there for however long of time, and then you pull out, right? And if you go to certain businesses, they give you a little sticker. That's how you would pay for your parking. So sometimes people would get to the exit booth, and they've been there half hour or so. They got one sticker, or they got a couple stickers, but they needed another one. And the cashier would say, well, you owe 75 cents. And people would call the office of the parking garage that I was managing and get so angry and say, your cashier was so incredibly rude to me. And I'd be like, wow, I'm so sorry to hear this. Could you tell me what they did? And they go, yeah, they charged me 75 cents to get out of the garage. Okay, well, I pay them to do that. So what did they do that was so rude? Well, they charged me 75 cents. Okay. You were here seeing your stockbroker and doing $1 million transactions, you probably can afford 75 cents. But anyway, the Roman impressment laws required a person to carry a soldier's needs for a mile. Now, I want you to think about that. If a soldier could come up, knock on your door, and say, hey, I need you to carry my stuff for a mile now. Remember, you don't get to take your car. You have to carry it, right? It's not getting in the car and going a mile. It's, here's the heavy backpack. Here it is. Let's go. How excited would you be? So pleased to give service to the country. Most of us probably wouldn't be all that excited. And in fact, for a Jew, this would almost be a double injustice because the Romans are occupying the promised land. So not only is it a reminder that they have lost what God had given them, but now they have to do the mile. And you could sit there and say, no, but the just thing for you to do is to follow the law, even if the law isn't fair. And Jesus is saying, even if the authorities choose to abuse you, he wants you to never let your heart get so filled with anger that it turns into this sort of bitterness that nobody wants to be around. That's the reality of it. You see, I would tell you that even today, we would find it to be an incredible challenge to fulfill an unjustifiable request, an unjust request or an unjust request by somebody who is even an improper authority to do it. We say sometimes we have rights. And Jesus says that if a proper authority makes even an unjust request, that you probably need to fulfill it. There might be ways to fight it, and I don't think he's saying you can't. But he's saying that on the day that that soldier comes, not only should you be willing to go that first mile, you should be willing to go the second. The mile's over, you're tired, and you go, you know what, let's do another. That's a hard issue. Most of us probably would be counting to a mile and would then begin to argue with the soldier whether the mile was right here or whether it was right here. Because at the immediate moment that we clock a mile, we're like, I'm done. Free at last. Jesus says no. Make it in your heart such that you are willing to go as far as you can. Think about that for a minute. Ultimately, Jesus is saying he wants his disciples' hearts to be prepared for an unconditional response to others' needs. This is where he starts getting into this whole thing about giving to those who ask, loaning to those who need to borrow. I don't know if you've ever loaned somebody something, but the Bible basically is really clear about this, that if you loan something to somebody, you ought to be ready to lose it and not be angry. Now, Jesus doesn't say if you continuously loan your prized possessions to somebody and they continually don't bring them back, then you need to continually be abused. Now I don't want you to read into that question. But what he is saying is that we shouldn't be sitting around going, I don't know. I could loan you this, but it's really important to me. How about a deposit? What's important to you that maybe, you would want to come back for? You see, when we choose to give to others, the idea is that we are giving up the power we have over one another. If you have something that I need to borrow, and I just need to borrow it for a little while, and I'm not able to go get it anywhere else, you have now power over me. So if I'm willingly handing this over, being willing to give it to you, knowing that you are supposed to give it back, but also knowing that I need to give up my rights if you don't. I need to not worry so much. Now, again, I'm not saying that there aren't things that we should do and sometimes we should go back. But one of the things that I have noticed is that there are a lot of people out there who sometimes, take, for example, if I loaned somebody my house and I rented it to them, and this has happened to me more than one occasion, I've rented a house out, and then ultimately they're unable to pay the bill. Now, I could do a couple of things there, right? I could take them to court, and I could try to get a judgment against them, but somebody who's not willing to pay the bill probably isn't going to satisfy a judgment. So what have I really done in my own heart if I go after that? You hear what I'm saying? It's the bitterness that becomes into me. Jesus never says that we should avoid discernment in such a case. He doesn't say that any random person that comes up and asks you to borrow money or to borrow an item or whatever else, you just hand it over. If you don't think that this person would take good care of it, or you have past experience where they haven't taken care of it or they haven't paid you back, it's okay. Jesus isn't asking you to do that. In fact, I think one of the questions he would really want us to do is say, am I really helping? Am I really being loving if I do this? You can do that and still be selfless in how you give and borrow and so on. Jesus' challenge is only about what's going on in a disciple's heart. I want to make sure we have this clear. If every time somebody asks you to borrow $20, you just go, oh, Jesus said I had to, and you pull it out and you hand it over, you will eventually be very bitter and upset with Jesus. He's not saying that every time somebody asks you to borrow something, you just have to do it because Jesus said so. What he's really challenging is for you to check your heart. If the reason you're not willing to loan some money to somebody who most likely really needs it and can pay you back is because you are worried about losing the money, your heart may not be in the right place, because now your money is more important than being a blessing to people around you. Think about it for a minute. Fulfilling these instructions so often has been taught as that, it's a sign of resistance. If somebody hits you on the cheek, you give the other one and go, yeah, I'm all right. Go ahead, do it again. I was willing to have you do it the first time. Now, honestly, your not fighting back is probably going to upset the other person. They're probably going to wonder why you're not willing to fight them back. They were probably looking for more than just one hit. But having the right heart also is not about, if I do this, then somebody else will get saved. I got to tell you something. There are so many times, that I have been around people. I'm like, well, if you do this, somebody will come to Jesus. No, you can loan somebody all the money they need. Doesn't mean that they're going to see Jesus. You can do wonderfully nice things for people. It doesn't mean that they're going to suddenly go, well, shoot, if Jesus makes you do this, sign me up. Don't have wrong ideas of what Jesus is trying to teach. Going above and beyond is not going to be an effective strategy for changing somebody else. You know what I mean? Being able to say, look, I can turn the other cheek doesn't mean that somebody else is going to be all right. That's the last time I ever slapped somebody. Next time I get mad, I'm going to choose something better. And by the way, it's also not really for self-improvement. You see, if you aren't already self-improved, transformed by the love of Jesus, you're not going to be able to give up your right to retaliate. You're going to hold on to it. I ask you, what is Jesus' call to his disciples as it relates to lex talionis and justice? Well, Jesus calls us to give up our right to retaliate for any injustice against us. Now again, what I'm talking about is what's going on in our heart. Jesus doesn't say, never discern. Have you ever heard somebody really grappling with an injustice that was done against them, and one of their questions ultimately becomes this: if I don't do X, call the police, they will continue to abuse somebody else, and so I need to do the right things to stop before something worse happens? Do you not think that Jesus is going to give you some discernment in those sorts of issues? But what he's saying is, in your heart, your biggest thing shouldn't be that, hey, in this whole injustice, I lost this, so now it's my turn to exact a pound of flesh. And by the way, we are not normally happy with that. We normally want back double. It's not an absolute. Other people are not free to abuse those who follow Christ. I want to make sure this is clear. I think sometimes we hear this sermon and we think, oh, we got to go be a doormat. No. Jesus doesn't call us to that. He calls us to have a heart in which what we are willing to do is to say, Jesus gave his life and died for us. We ought to be able to take a little bit of injustice against us. What did Jesus tell us? Didn't he say, once you follow me, life is going to be all unicorns and flowers and roses and sunrises? And no. You follow God, and the next thing that happens is you're in the midst of a famine. He wants your heart, though, to be in the right place. I think we should be people who promote a society where unjust actions have consequences. I think God still believes that that's something that needs to happen. But I do think that the issue becomes us when we are more worrying about, you did this, so I got to do this. You did that, I got to do this. We're just going to do tit for tat all the day long, an eye for an eye until nobody has any eyes. Bunch of blind people running around. The kids are in charge. Actually, they'd probably be the first to lose their eyes. When our hearts are in the right place, we actually become more concerned about the one who offends us than we are about our rights against them. We become more, our heart is more hurting for them and for where they are. Especially if we know that they're destined for hell at the moment, than they are about, gee, I'm owed something here. Now, I'm not talking about our church here, but I think that this sort of describes an attitude that we occasionally see, where if we were to drive through the typical church parking lot, there'd be a whole bunch of bumper stickers that say, I don't get mad, I get even. You've seen that phrase. Hopefully, if it's the bumper sticker on your car, you'll kind of scrape it off. You understand what I'm saying? I'm not talking a literal bumper sticker. The idea is that we really do experience injustices, and by the way, we also perpetrate them. And so we must have our heart in the right place. How do you respond to injustice toward you? And really, part of my question here would be, how would you like others to respond to you? To the times when you have been unjust towards them? Second thing I tell you this morning is that Jesus calls us to shock imaginations and seek God's intention for our response. Now, by shocking imaginations, Jesus really is shocking the imagination here. When you have been taught your whole life, it's an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, leg for leg, all the way down the line. And now Jesus comes and says, this is what you've heard, but let me clarify something. Give up your right. What? What are you saying? You see, an eye for an eye is easy. We get to be in line to be compensated for whatever unjust actions have happened towards us. Last week I saw you at the grocery store. You didn't say hello. Was it something I did? Were you embarrassed to be seen by me or with me? Did you not want to know, whoever you were hanging out with, that we know each other? Sounds silly, doesn't it? Maybe the person didn't see you. And do you know why they were walking really fast away from you? Because they were in a hurry to leave. I'm one of those people, when I go to the grocery store, I really don't like hanging out. Get in, get out. Let's be done. Some people like to go in, and they seem to be strolling the aisles looking for people they know. This also would mean that others are owed for anything we've done against them. If you are in line to get what you are, others are in line to get from you. And guess what? God has a better plan. But by the way, it's shocking. Because never in our minds do we start saying really that, oh, we have had this really bad thing happen to us. And so you know what? What would happen if that person just had some blessings poured on them? What if God would just really bless them and really just grab a hold of them and bless the snot out of them? When was the last time that was your response when somebody did something against you? Now, we may say, I can't be the one that, gets the revenge. But I sure hope I'm there and get to see it happen. That's where our imagination goes. Somebody did something really wrong against me. I started driving school buses. I drove school buses in that person's area. I wasn't sure I'd be able to know where the brake was if I saw them walk in front of the bus. That's where my imagination went. It wasn't, oh Lord, bless them. Because they've hurt me and hurt my family so much that I can't imagine anything other than them getting blessings. What do we do? For well over 120 years, through multiple generations, the Hatfields and the McCoys were feuding. So much so that you say Hatfields and McCoys in almost any part of the country, and people immediately know what you're referring to. It makes its way into movies. It makes its way into game shows. It makes its way into everything. The only way for such a battle of injustice toward one another is ever going to stop is for someone to finally stand up and go, stop! I give up my right to get even. Really, what we need to do is give each other hugs. This is Kentucky and West Virginia. We're family. Well, fortunately, the Hatfields and the McCoys, they now have a reunion every year. They called a truce, I think in 2003, and the family comes together, and families come together and tries to be kind and live in peace. But it means that somebody had to say, no longer are we going to continue to fight one another, to try to get everything else. What sweet revenge have you been holding out for? Has your heart overcome the need to retaliate? Or are you still hoping that you'll have a front seat to that person's loss? From where does your justice come? Now, I don't know about you. I love what Jesus says here, that our heart should be in the right place, but living that out is not always as easy as I wish it were. Because there are people who have done things against me. There's people that I'm sure have done things against you. And sometimes things aren't exactly the way I wish that they were. And so what is the one place that we should turn to? We should turn to Jesus. We should tell him what we're thinking. And so as I pray today, I would invite you that if this is one of those moments where you need the altar, to come use the altar. If it's one of those moments where you're like, God's been kind of poking me a little bit during this whole time, that this would be a moment in which you give up your rights and that God would fill you. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your word, for what it means. Even in these difficult scripture passages, when you have taught us directly that even in the midst of unjust actions against us, that we should just overlook injustice from the perspective of needing revenge and recognize that you as God have suffered the most incredible injustice that anybody could face. You, Lord, sent your Son who did nothing that would require his death, who did nothing that was sinful, and you had him be a placeholder for all of that. Lord, we get worried over when somebody looks at us the wrong way. And yet Jesus willingly goes to the cross, and he's willing to do whatever is required. Lord, help us to live in a way that honors you, that lives into the spirit of what your Son taught us all those years ago as he was preaching this sermon to his disciples. Help us to discern how you would want us to react. Help our first reaction not to be that of seeking revenge, but to be that of really caring and loving for the person who has offended us. Lord, there are just so many ways in which we as a society have learned to hurt one another. And Lord, I just ask that you would make us people who bring healing into the world instead of spiraling into violence, instead of demanding more than just what's owed to us, instead of being more worried about our physical possessions than about being known for people who are willing to sacrificially give for your name. Just because you said so, and for no other reason. Lord, we love you. We thank you. We give this whole issue into your hands and ask that you would help us to be living as transformed people who recognize that you are a God who does some incredibly great things and has shown us the way to live. In Jesus' name, all God's people said, amen.
Thanks for watching this video with me. If you want to see more, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified when we go live or post a new video. We'd also like to invite you to join us in person for a service. Visit us at desertgrace.org or give us a call at 928-305-1132 for more information. Thanks for watching.